When someone mentions United States presidents, a person's thoughts tend to go to the current president or the one before them. Then they may recall George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, or a few various others. One president in particular, though, while certainly not forgotten, may not always be immediately remembered. That president is Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. was born in New York City on October 27, 1858. Roosevelt was a sickly child whose main ailment was asthma. However, Roosevelt quickly found out that physical exertion helped to quell his illness. After that, he took it upon himself to live an active life, even picking up boxing. Roosevelt was married when he was 22. He and his wife, Alice Hathaway Lee, had a daughter together and were married for 4 years. Tragically, though, Lee died 2 days after giving birth. And 11 hours before that, Roosevelt's mother, Mittie, died of typhoid fever. Roosevelt reportedly marked a large X in his diary and wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." This did not stop him, however. After a small stint in politics, Roosevelt moved to North Dakota to live a more natural life of being a cowboy and a ranchman. While he achieved many accomplishments in the West, a harsh winter killed half of his cattle herd and pushed him to move back to the East. In 1896, once back east and after pursuing certain political motivations, Roosevelt was appointed as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy by then-President William McKinley. During his tenure, Roosevelt urged for a buildup of U.S. Navy in terms of strength. This act helped America prepare for the looming Spanish-American War, in which Teddy Roosevelt would play a big part. Now a lieutenant colonel himself, Roosevelt formed the Rough Riders with Colonel Leonard Wood, and after a stint of training, departed for Cuba. Once there, his major accomplishment was the Battle of Kettle Hill, where he led his men against entrenched Spanish riflemen. Looking back on the experience, Roosevelt commented, "On the day of the big fight, I had to ask my men to do a deed that European military writers considered utterly impossible of performance. That is, to attack over open ground an unshaken infantry armed with the best modern repeating rifles behind a formidable system of entrenchments. The only way to get them to do it in the way it had to be done was to lead them myself." Upon his return from Cuba, Roosevelt ran as the Republican gubernatorial candidate in New York in 1898 and won the general election by just 1%. It was as governor that Roosevelt shaped his skills that would help him later in his presidency. Roosevelt was later elected as vice president of the U.S. after his predecessor, Garrett Hobart, died of heart failure. It was during his term that the president, William McKinley, was shot and died soon after. The same day McKinley died, Roosevelt was sworn in as the 26th President of the United States. In office, he worked hard to bust up monopolies, weed out corruption, and to promote conservation of wildlife and of America's natural resources and establish national forests. Another huge move for Roosevelt while in the White House was to commission the Panama Canal in 1903. The canal now allowed America's Navy and merchants quick access to the East. After the presidency, Roosevelt went on safari in Africa to obtain specimens for the Smithsonian Institution. While in Africa, Roosevelt and his fellow hunters captured and killed 11,400 animals, from insects to large game. Roosevelt also toured Europe during that time and met many world leaders there. Later, after returning to the United States, Roosevelt became disillusioned with the Republican Party and with political allies formed the Bull Moose Party. Roosevelt decided to run for presidential office again. While campaigning in Milwaukee in October 1912, Teddy Roosevelt was shot by would-be assassin John Fleming Schrank. The bullet hit him in the chest, passing through a steel eyeglass case and a 50-page thick copy of his speech in his jacket. He spoke for 90 minutes, commenting, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." After the speech, doctors decided the bullet would be more dangerous to remove, so Roosevelt had the bullet in his chest until the day he died. Unfortunately for Roosevelt, he went on to lose the election that year to Woodrow Wilson. However, he received a higher share of the popular vote than any other third-party candidate in history. After going on an adventure in South America, where he became grievously ill, Roosevelt returned to the U.S. Roosevelt never quite got over his illness, however. He continued to be politically active, being at odds with then-President Woodrow Wilson about World War I and foreign policy. Roosevelt even lost his youngest son, Quentin, to the war. In January 1919, Roosevelt succumbed to a blood clot in his sleep. Then Vice President Thomas R. Marshall said of him, "Death had to take Roosevelt sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight." He was buried at his house, Sagamore Hill. Roosevelt was a huge public figure during his time. He fought for many progressive reforms and is still remembered today for his outdoorsman attitude and famous quote, "Speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far." He is etched into the side of Mount Rushmore just as he is etched into America's history.